Hello.
Hello.
Hey man, you got me?
I got you. All right, how's that? I had to elevate my laptop to get the right angle.
All good. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Early here, so just came in from a run. Getting my coffee
Uh,
in now, so I should be awake in 10 minutes or so.
nice way to start the day. It's about 5 p.m. here. So
And where are you at? LA, right?
yeah, Santa Monica. That's right.
Nice. And you from there?
Nice.
You
Yeah.
from there originally?
No, I'm from Tennessee originally. So I grew up in Tennessee, went to college there. I lived in Vegas for a while. I was back and forth between Vegas and Vancouver for a couple of years, and then I've been in LA for 3 years.
Cool. And
Cool.
which of those areas do you prefer?
Definitely Santa Monica, living on the beach is not too shabby.
It's hard. It's hard to beat, isn't it? I'm in Phuket, Thailand, right across the street from the beach as well, and uh,
No, sh-
yeah, it's pretty nice just to be able to do a sunset walk or a morning run or hop in the water
uh,
when you get hot.
I would love to pick your brain about that. I'm actually considering some more mobile lifestyle. So,
Well, shoot, man. I mean, it's great. I mean, I don't have much bad to say about it at this point.
yeah.
I'm getting a little bit. I'm starting to think about like stronger roots. So probably the opposite of what you just mentioned. Wanting to get a house somewhere and some land and that sort of thing, and really kind of build a permanent home base. But for my needs at the moment, the lifestyle is great. It's very simple. The food is great. The people are super chill. The weather obviously is perfect. Nice place, girlfriend.
Cost of, cost of living is microscopic, I imagine.
It's getting. The bot's been super strong over the last number of years, and and especially in Phuket because it's so tourist heavy. I mean, it's the island itself is basically overrun with Chinese tourists and others as well. But in the part that I'm in, right down on the southern tip, it's pretty chill. So, but yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, compared to LA, it would be like shockingly cheap, but
Yeah,
not as cheap as it once was, I guess is what I'm getting at.
right. I
Yeah.
hear you. Well,
Um,
cool destinations like that tend to become more expensive, so
yeah,
enjoy it while
exactly,
you can.
exactly. All right, man. Let's just jump into this. How much time do you have for our chat today?
I figured about an hour, but a little flexible.
Perfect. Um, First of all, I really enjoyed the series of Medium articles that you did. I read some of them and listened to some of them from Guy at the Crypto Economy, and I really like just how kind of complete but not overly detailed the approach is. Not to say it's not detailed, but in Bitcoin, like a lot of people can get really lost in the weeds, or we all probably can if we allow ourselves.
Of
And
course.
I just thought that it was a really concise, kind of informed summary of what this thing is and what it represents. And then I did listen to your podcast on Citizen Bitcoin as well, and pretty much the same feeling about that. So I'm not exactly sure where to start because I don't just want you to tell me like why do you care about Bitcoin, but there's one thing. This is the place we'll start because I thought it was an interesting comment, and you said that sound money, represented in the form of Bitcoin, is a resurgence of or represents a resurgence of ancient wisdom emerging in the world. And then you compared it to things like diet and yoga and Ayurvedic medicine and kind of more traditional themes, more traditional forms of wisdom emerging in the world. So why don't we just get kicked off with that and we can see where it leads?
Straight into the deep end.
Yeah, let's do it, man. Why else are we
Uh,
here?
yeah, absolutely. So I've been thinking about that a little bit lately, and it's again very formative. Um, but the way I look at it is that we, as biological organisms, are complex systems, and we're actually at our core we are digital, right? DNA is digital information that we pass on from generation to generation. Um, and it feels like now that we've entered this digital age, where we've figured out how to replicate sort of the complexity that is biology or is an economy or is other complex systems, meteorology, things like this, that we actually have, for the first time in history, these tools that themselves are complex systems. So we're accessing ancient wisdom in a way that is iterating very rapidly in the world, like through mediums such as this, a podcast, or Medium blogs, or all the plethora of essays and cheap content media that's available on the internet. It just seems to be sparking this reawakening, and that's sort of the mental side of it. And then there's just a general feeling. I just feel like people are desiring to be more woke these days. Like, it's cool to be woke. It's cool to be in a spiritual pursuit, or trying to work on your own shit and really see yourself for who you are. And I don't know. I think it's an exciting time to be alive, and it has something to do with the digital age, something to do with the tools we have made, sort of remaking us as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree very much, and I think it's interesting on a couple of things you said. One is, I do think there's this like growing movement of people that, you use the term woke, however we want to describe people that are just kind of, really, really concerned with, optimizing their lives, how their brains function, the things that they do from which they derive meaning. Like, they really, they want to know what's going on and use that knowledge to squeeze as much out of this life as they can. And then, of course, you have the flip side of the equally extreme group of people that seem to be completely not oblivious, but disinterested in those sorts of pursuits. And that may be the cause of some of the fracturing we're seeing in society and culture in many parts of the world today.
Yeah, that actually makes me think of another thought, was that social media, again, a digital tool, is sort of acting as this amplifier of human nature. Like, on one half of the chasm, you have what I call the asses and abs crew, right? Like,
right.
Selfies and getting a lot of validation and likes and dopamine hits. But then on the other side of social media, you have these people divulging and sharing these very personal journeys, very traumatic experiences they've been through, whether it's abuse or drug addiction or anything of that sort. The stories that are really hard to share publicly, and people are gravitating towards that. People that have gone through similar situations are identifying with these people and saying, "Hey, I'm not the only one going through this," and they're finding support sort of in the community.
Yeah.
So I think it is interesting. Again, it's kind of like the tools themselves are amoral, right? They can be used for good or bad. You can use a knife to slice apples or go stab someone. And I think you see that with digital tools, specifically social media, as creating that effect.
Yeah. Rob, do you have a pair of headsets? I'm getting a bit of echo on my voice when I speak.
I do. Sorry. I just need to figure out how to connect these to the computer, though.
Should just be if you open up Skype settings or preferences, audio video settings. That's usually how you can just add the new device.
Okay, Skype settings.
I think it's when you click the Skype tab, it's audio video preferences is the button.
Okay. What is the... I see audio video, I don't see anything there. Default device.
Yeah, so there should be a little, under microphone, the little arrow, down arrow should give you the option to select.
There is not a down arrow. I wonder if I have to turn on Bluetooth or something.
Oh, they're wireless, are they?
Yeah, I can plug in too, though.
Like, your voice is fine if you have a way to just have headphones in, like I don't know if you have a pair of wired headphones you can just plug in.
Let's see if this will work. I've got AirPods and I've got earphones.
It's not a deal breaker if you can't get it to work. I just kept hearing a little bit of my voice back.
I wonder if I turn it down a little bit. Would that help?
Possibly.
I'm gonna test that. I just did the
Check,
half
check,
volume.
check. Yeah, that should work. I'm not getting much back now.
Okay.
Um, but yeah. To your point, now that we're back, to your point about social media. I mean, we really are in so many ways today in society in uncharted waters. And this constant digital mirror that we get, not only digital mirror, but digital periscope, into everybody else's lives as well as a reflection back of our own. It's really, I mean, it's unprecedented. So it's impossible to predict the effect that this is going to have on people's minds. And I mean, it's funny that we're so kind of nonchalant about it. Not people are aware of it, and there's discussion about rates of depression and how social media might be related to that. But like, still, it's not like people are freaking out about the fact that we've this like explosion of ability to communicate, and not just communicate everything basically, and the effects that may have on society. And of course, you've got this big privacy discussion now because you put out that much personal stuff in the digital realm, and nobody's considering privacy at the beginning of it, or very few people. And so of course there's opportunistic companies more than happy to take up all that data and package it up and try to monetize it in some way. And I guess this does come back to Bitcoin in some way, because Bitcoin is especially for non tech oriented people, it's kind of forcing them or inspiring them to look at their digital lives in a different way, and try to and start to consider things like privacy more.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like I keep oscillating back and forth to, are we going into a future that's where everyone is in more control of their data and more private, or are we going into a future where just things are so blown open in terms of transparency because we're just going to be ever more connected that privacy no longer exists?
Yeah, I agree with that internal debate. I'm not entirely sure myself. It seems to me like it's probably healthy to just operate under the assumption that you're always on camera and mic'd up, and that's just the way of the world.
Yeah.
But that's easier said than done, clearly. Everyone tends to be one person, maybe at home versus out in public, and depending on the different roles they fill. And I guess one of the things, too, that excited me originally in Bitcoin, I guess before I was as much of a Bitcoin maximalist, was this idea of owning your data again, and the individual actually benefiting from the monetization of their data.
Right.
Versus today we have these pure data monopolies, as you said, opportunists that came in, centralized and siloed control and distribution of all this data explosion, and they've become in some senses the new overlords. Right. We've always had these robber barons with every sort of wave of innovation, and this is just the latest expression of that. But I think there is some promise, and without going too deep into the technical weeds that I'm not prepared to talk about, there's some promise in the technology that facilitates Bitcoin, I think, to be applied to other domains,
Right.
to where we could sort of decentralize or disrupt these data monopolies at some point.
Yeah.
And then, as to when, time is the most difficult thing to predict in this environment, because everything's exponential and things come out of nowhere, and just makes for really exciting living.
Absolutely. I think it might, on that point, it might be the case that things continue to, I mean, I can't see an environment in which our lives don't become more and more transparent, and we're not expressed through more and more media. We don't have, VR avatars, and we're not sharing more of our personal lives and all that kind of stuff. But maybe the big difference will just be that we are the ones that benefit from whatever output of our data we choose to express, whereas before it was just like, throw it all out there and let somebody else do something with it. Maybe now we'll be the beneficiaries of it. We're starting to recognize that it is valuable, and there's other considerations like, who gets access to it and stuff like that. But it's squirrely times, man. And just a final point on what you were saying about kind of, well, the resurgence of ancient wisdom. We all have, to make an analogy to the ancient world, we all have the Library of Alexandria in our pockets, right? And much more than that, of course. And it's, I do get lost in the weeds often, just kind of daydreaming about like, what is the implications of everybody in the world effectively, or, a big portion of the world having access to the world's history of information and being updated in real time of the new information coming onto the coming onto the world. And as you said, I think that's why we see so many people that there's a never-ending stream of information for you to kind of chew on and decide which is the right stuff to integrate into your life. And I know this may be way off base, but I don't know how familiar you are with like ancient secret rites, like the mysteries of Eleusis and other similar things, where like kind of they are these highly secretive, exclusive ceremonies and rites reserved for the elite of society, political, financial, that sort of thing. And I feel like that's now being offered to everybody, because there's not going to, like, how many secrets are left? Information is being so democratized that we're all kind of in this scenario where all the information is laid out, and it's but for us to choose how we want that information to impact our lives via how we integrate it and express it through our own, through ourselves.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I like the Library of Alexandria being in our pocket. It's a good example, and it seems like we've almost compressed space and time, right? All the knowledge of humanity that's been collected across time and is now currently being collected across space, and it's compressed into our pocket, right? And we're able to, with our digits in the digital age, to access it freely and openly and quickly. And it just accelerates these feedback loops that are inherent to all natural systems, right? Including, the economy, actually our own biology. People are changing the way they eat, exercise, and train. And it also puts it on these rails that are, I call the internet this universal engine for knowledge exchange. So now that we've pulled all of that wisdom, historic wisdom, into the present, put it in everyone's pocket, and then we put it on these rails that allow us to iterate on it super quickly. It's almost like I forget who made the comparison, but like the global cerebrum is waking up, right? We've become a global mind, and the hive mind is starting to awaken in some respect.
Yeah.
I'm not as familiar with the ancient rituals, actually. I've heard of them, but I think that makes sense. It's increasingly difficult and inefficient to keep things in the dark.
Yeah.
So again, I think just operating on the premise that you've got one life to live, you should live it on purpose, and you should live as if everyone's watching.
Yeah, and I think this may be, part of the reason why people are so attracted to Bitcoin is because when you have all this information and you go through it, we all take the information that we gain, then we look out in the world and we see how it fits onto it, and we see, where there's blind spots and holes and what needs to be upgraded and improved, and we do that for ourselves and we do that for the exterior world. And, all that information and the speed with which it travels, I think has led a lot of us to say, like, well, one of the big things, one of the big issues with the world is definitely the monetary standard and the government money for an all-encompassing term. And if we could change that, if we could have something else, then because I guess what we're all seeking is freedom. We want the freedom to be who we are, to be able to express ourselves however we want, to be able to engage with who and what we want. And even though most of us on a daily basis, even under this current system, we're pretty darn free, a lot of us. But we see this big monolithic thing, the cap kind of on that, and I think all that information that's been so easy to acquire has really accelerated the process of seeing things with greater clarity. And when a solution like Bitcoin has emerged, thinking, damn, this thing could really be could really have a big effect if we could replace it with, or if we could replace the existing, paradigm with this paradigm. The freedom that would enable could be tremendous. And I know you've written about that a bit. So why don't you, why don't you wrap on that?
Absolutely. I like to say that the cornerstones of capitalism. And to be very clear, capitalism gets somewhat of a bad rap today. People think it's responsible for the ills that many people face, but it's just not true, right? So the cornerstones of capitalism really are rule of law, so that you can resolve disputes effectively, non-violently, preferably, because that's expensive and messes stuff up. Private property rights, so that you know what you hold and own. Your relationship between a person and an asset is respected by others. And then I would add, the third leg of that is monetary policy, right? What is the monetary system? That is the economic water that facilitates all of it. And here in the U.S., we have, rather relatively strong and reliable rule of law. We have problems just like everywhere else. Private property rights are especially strong here relative to other countries. But monetary policy is the same across the board worldwide. It's the monetary policy we've dictated to the world at the conclusion of World War II. And that is, we get to decide how much there is. And another good way to think about this is, if you consider that money is really just a list of who owns what, any single party that can rewrite that list or amend it in their favor is effectively violating private property rights. You are reallocating or redistributing claims on productive assets from whoever's using the money into the hands of who can produce the money. So literally, inflation in that sense is a violation of private property rights. So it's important to take that perspective that of those three legs, we really only have two in the whole world, in the free world. We've never really seen the third leg materialize other than when gold was dominant worldwide. I think by restoring, giving us this strong, reliable measure of value and mechanism for storing wealth and value that we create with our productive efforts, it gives capitalism that third leg to really enhance our productivity worldwide. And at the end of the day, that's what economics is all about. The more productive we become, the cheaper things are, the less expensive it is to live. But right now we have this giant parasite on our back, effectively, which are the shareholders of central banks worldwide, and they're extracting wealth from global citizens. And if you remove that, you eliminate that monopoly and restore us to a free market and actually let actual, true free market capitalism take hold, I think you usher the world into an era unseen.
Yeah. I agree. And, even the gold standard eras of the past, I mean, it's always been susceptible to some form of manipulation. It's far more resilient to manipulation than, a fiat money standard, but there's been debasement and clipping. And even when it was a pure standard, like the governments would hold a large portion of it, or they'd be the custodians of it. So, you still have counterparty risk and ways for it to be manipulated. And, one of the reasons that I'm so excited about Bitcoin, and obviously many people share this, is it's literally the first time in human history where we have something that, that nobody can manipulate. That it could provide a extreme upgrade in a monetary media from anything we've ever had in the past. And as you said, if you look at those periods of time when the gold standard was broadly used and more or less not manipulated, it did usher in these great areas of humanity. And so, what will we get as a result of adopting a different monetary standard? Because, the monetary medium that we use is the foundation on which society is built, right? I ask the question a lot, and I'll ask you later, how do you define money? And for me, money is just the primary organizing mechanism for human economic interaction. I know there's various definitions, but, and I made a video on this before, but the attributes of the money will dictate the structures that you get in society. And so whatever deficiencies or whatever attributes are non-beneficial in the money, structures will have to be erected around it to compensate for that deficiency. And
Absolutely.
so, you know, the more sound, the more the money has the attributes that you want and need and that facilitate the economic interaction, the less structures have to be built up around it. And of course, this is the primary threat of Bitcoin, right? Is because it actually disintermediates so many different levels and structures of society that we have, and that's why the powers that be are probably not going to be too enthusiastic about adopting it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's one of those things. And what I find, because in the U.S. and in Canada and many areas of the world today, socialism is starting to kind of rear its ugly head back up. And as you said, you know, capitalism gets kind of a bad rap. And to me, it's clear as day that it's not. We don't need less capitalism. We need more capitalism. You know, and I think they make the mistake in thinking that capitalism and every quote unquote everything having a price is a negative thing. And I think they don't understand that when you combine free markets with socialist state or socialized money, it's money controlled by the state, you'll actually get dramatically more inequality versus if you combine free markets with also free money, you get a much more even, but of course not equal, but more even prosperity. And it's weird to me today, and maybe you can comment on this because you're actually there. Why do you think it's ignorance or they just know not to touch it? But why do so many of the politicians that are around today, nobody mentions the money? Nobody.
I would say, to put it politely, they are in bed together, right? Central bankers and politicians. Banks have captured a lot of the political infrastructure of the world. And it goes hand in hand with I said this earlier, I tweeted this a couple of days ago, and I said that money is the means and ends of all warfare.
Sure.
Literally, every war is only fought with money. That's the number one reason, someone's defeated, they run out of money, or they strike a deal. And then, two, every time you go to war, like country to country, they're specifically targeting their central bank or their oil, like it is the money that they're seeking. And I guess it is, Hayek wrote about this in Road to Serfdom, that if we have any socialistic element inside of our political structure, that it has this irresistible gravity, this irresistible pull, that by operating according to one single unified plan that is beyond compromise, it actually pulls these other free elements in, where people say, I can't make as much money being a doctor or an architect doing something productive for society. I make more money being a bureaucrat supporting this plan, oppressing people. And the whole thing, really, it infects society. So I think you see socialism rearing its ugly head again because we have socialized money, socialistic money.
Yeah.
And the only way, I think maybe it was Hayek too, the sly roundabout way to take it out of their hands, that's the only way it's ever going to work. No one's ever going to relinquish this power. If you hold the money printing machine, the system that has institutionalized time theft from everyone else, you're not going to let that go. I don't care who you are, what kind of moral crusader you are. That power is going to corrupt you. It will corrupt your very human nature. And that apparatus of power really attracts those types of people, and it changes those types of people as they get closer to the control of that apparatus. So I think it almost, to save ourselves from our own egoic failings, we have to have this sovereignty layer that's beyond us, this monetary sovereignty layer that we can't control. And that's what gold was, more or less, right? It's still physical. So violent coercion kind of led to its centralization and ultimate manipulation that got us to the fiat standard we are today. But Bitcoin, being purely digital and informational, is even further beyond reach. There's kind of these 5 qualities to money that really matter. There's divisibility, so you can subdivide it and trade and price things. There's durability, so that it holds physical value across time. There's portability, so you can transmit that value across space. There's recognizability, so that you can transmit that value across consciousness. People need to be able to recognize it, know that the gold is real or the Bitcoin has been assayed or whatever the thing is, know that it's not counterfeit. And then, most importantly, which is the anchor to time itself, is scarcity. And money as this mechanism for market pricing and trading time, it has to be anchored to the reality of time scarcity. So Bitcoin, gold provided a lot of those functions well, but it was subject to this physical manipulation. Bitcoin takes the first few, so the durability, the divisibility, the portability, and the recognizability of information. So literally, information can be divided as deeply as possible. Clearly, it's very easy to recognize. It's very portable, can go anywhere, and whatever the other one was. And he combined it with the scarcity, the absolute scarcity of time. So that's what makes Bitcoin this truly revolutionary monetary sovereignty layer that seemingly is mostly beyond the reach of the state. And it's exciting because, as Rothbard said, no attempt to reform the state has ever taken hold. None. Nothing has ever worked to hold back the advance of the state. And this represents a promise to possibly do that. So that's what's exciting about Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, and this, I totally agree. And I think that's because, like, any attempt to, change the nature of the state ultimately has failed, because the state is a manifestation of the money. The state is a manifestation of the money used. You're always going to need it if you use a certain type of money. Even something like gold. You're going to need someone to protect it and to store it and all that kind of stuff. And we're all, I'm sure, super excited about Bitcoin. We see that and we recognize it, and that's why we're here. But a lot, there's been a lot of conversations lately about how the state could potentially stop Bitcoin. And so some people think, they could try as they might, but they'll shoot themselves in the foot. It's not going to work, jurisdictional arbitrage, however it plays out, but they can't do it. And then there's other people that are much more are on the other side of the argument, where they say, no, the state could just pass a law, and if someone puts a gun in your face and says, burn your Bitcoin or I'm going to throw you in jail, how resistant are you going to be to that? So where do you fall on the, kind of how could the government stop this thing if it gets to a point where, it has to get to that point, right? You would think that ultimately that's the showdown.
I don't know if you saw on Twitter today, Gigi posted a piece on Medium called, I think, How Do You Stop Bitcoin, or How Do Governments Kill Bitcoin, something like that. Yeah. And the whole article was, they don't. It's just 2 words. So it was kind of a joke. I thought it was fun. Got some good action on Twitter. I guess I would fall somewhere in the middle. And clearly you can't just pass a law and say, don't hold Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is just information. It's just a language. It's, one, here in the U.S., protected by the First Amendment. But 2, even if the First Amendment was repealed, how in the hell do you enforce that? How do you regulate open source technology that is literally, you can print the entire code base and transaction history on paper and set it on it's very difficult to regulate. And if we look at the history of the government and enforcing some of their arcane laws, you could look at cannabis, for instance, or any of the war on drugs, it didn't slow things down, to say the least. The war on drugs just created these cartels that fed on monopoly profits. But the distribution of drugs in this country it's accelerated.
Put a lot of people in jail, though, right?
Put a lot of people in jail, of course. And not that that's a perfect analogy, because there's clearly much higher stakes here in the market, money versus drugs, but the informational nature of it, and the light speed with which this space develops in terms of custody technology and transmission and even workarounds for the internet. We've got blockstream satellites, we've got mesh nets. I just don't see governments keeping up with that. And then when you layer in the aspect of self-interest, where you have, I think, Venezuela today discussing holding Bitcoin and Ethereum as reserve assets in their central bank, that triggers game theory at the nation state level, right? If this country, Venezuela or whoever is holding Bitcoin, I, as an adversary sitting across the table, cannot afford, game theoretically, to not also hold exposure to that asset. Because if this thing does work and he takes 100x or 1000x on his balance sheet, then that jeopardizes my relationship with that other country. So when you couple in, it's just digital tech, it's breakneck speed evolution, and then the self-interest aspect of Bitcoin. I think it's disruptive to the state.
Of course.
I don't know how long it takes. I don't know what form it comes in. I don't know how violent it is. But over the long term, you see the state becoming more decentralized. You see the state actually competing for our citizenship, saying these are our tax rates. Here's our menu of services. They're actually competing to get people to immigrate to them.
Yeah.
Versus today, we are, very. I would just say the power dynamic's very reversed. Most people feel like the state is this big, ugly, scary guy in the sky, pretty much anywhere you live. So I think that power dynamic reverses in the digital age.
Man, that would be such a cool dynamic. States competing for, to attract citizens based on, the services they provided, the laws they enforced, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll find out, I guess, but it's, I'm on the optimistic side, and I'm on the side of kind of that you just mentioned, where, that maybe they'll really try, but things could move very fast, and they might find that it gets out of their hands very quickly. But then I have a long conversation with someone like Eric Voskuil, and he's like, well, all they got to do is write a law, and the party could be over. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So like I'm going back and forth. But I'm more on the side of, I just don't see how this thing can be stopped. But it is also another reason why the current, popularity of socialism is somewhat concerning. And maybe ultimately it doesn't matter, but, any movements to increase state power certainly seems counterproductive at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Another way to kind of think about that is that I would say that Bitcoin converts electricity and self-interest into indisputable records, right? It's blockchain, and expansion of its network. So again, it is actively and economically incentivizing every human that interacts with it, right? And that holds true at every scale, individually, the community, the nation state. So that's a very powerful feedback loop that I don't see you passing a law in the physical world that it's going to do a lot to put a dent in it. That being said, there's going to be a lot of barriers and artifices and laws passed to try and inhibit this thing along the way. But in the grand scheme of things, I tend to think it's going to continue doing what it's been doing.
Yeah. And, maybe this is a good time to talk about what you want your role to be in kind of that new paradigm, what you're doing now and what you see for yourself in the future.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess, in my writing and in my speaking, I'm trying to distill these complex technical historic factors into a very clearly, easily understood, palatable format for people. Getting back to one of your questions earlier, like what is money? And I have two definitions, if I may. One is the technical. It's a technology for moving value across time and space. or space-time, which they're the same thing as Einstein taught us, but that's an aside. And my other definition is a little more simple, is that money is a metaphor for time. It is the tool we use to price and trade our time. Because at the end of the day, time is it is the ultimate bottleneck to economics. Like the price of everything, natural resources, everything that was here on this planet, they have decreased in terms of human time necessary to produce them as we become more productive. So money is meant to be anchored to time itself, so that we have this yardstick against which to measure everything else. In my role in this shifting paradigm, I'm a student. I read as much as I can. I've been very aggressively taking in all that I can. And then I want to, through my own lens, share it back, and hopefully in a way that can penetrate minds far and wide. It's very more clearly understood. Because again, as you said earlier, it's so easy to get lost in the woods here. This thing, Bitcoin touches every domain, basically. And if you really go into the technical aspects, you're totally lost. Like that's a nightmare. Not a nightmare, it's very complex. And so I just want to be someone that helps others see the light, I guess.
Right. And so as far as the work you're doing now, what role is that playing?
Sure. So my company is Parallax Digital. We operate some crypto asset hedge funds. I serve as both the chief executive and the chief investment officer. So there's a lot of that educational role involved in those positions. Mm-hmm. And then we're also working on a consulting business focused on digital securities. And this is much more pioneering and exploratory. The concept of actually taking the technology that wraps Bitcoin and wrapping everything else, stocks, bonds, real estate, and figuring out how that makes things move faster, cheaper, and better worldwide. But it rubs up against a lot of legal frameworks that are much more difficult to reform because they involve physical assets. Whereas Bitcoin is purely informational and digital, there's not anything anyone can do to stop it, right? You just kind of by holding your private keys, you are bucking the monopoly on money. That's much harder to do when it comes to real estate or shares in a company, things that are tangible.
Right. Because ultimately it's a claim rather than, a bearer asset, I guess.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I think the path that it takes is that Bitcoin is reforming the state by sort of taking away its taxing ability over time, its seigniorage rights. And by that change, the state becomes a little less relevant and maybe more open to adopting these other technologies in the digital securities world. So it's a long game, but we're trying to figure it out. And, that's it.
And so how receptive, for the first part of that business, how receptive have, clients been when you go to meet clients, pitch clients, educate them? What's the response these days versus, a year ago, 2 years ago?
Let's just say in 2017, the interest was astronomical.
It's catnip.
It was unbelievable. It was order taking, I guess you would say.
Right.
And in 2018, the exact opposite, absolute ice cold out there. So it was an interesting way to see FOMO and FUD up close and personal at a high net worth institutional family office level.
Yeah.
And today it's warming up again. As one of my friends in Tennessee said, when the food is thrown out into the water, the fish come back around, right? So I guess the rebound, the market rebound in Bitcoin has attracted some of the fish again.
Did that, in 2018, did you have to have those quarterlies or biannual sit-downs with clients and try to explain this? And if so, were they receptive to that and understood that it was cyclical, or thought like, Jesus, I got involved in a tulip bubble. Like, what were those conversations like?
There was a lot of pain, for sure. The market as a whole drew down 90%, I believe, in 2018. So even well outperforming the market, you're still getting your ass kicked relative to most other markets. So it was a trying experience, to say the least. We've, been very fortunate to have a very good investor base. They've been supportive on balance, but there have definitely been concerns and people, voicing their concerns very loudly. So I am grateful actually to have gone through it. I think it really hardens you as an entrepreneur to go through those painful experiences. And it feels good to see the market doing what we think it should be doing. Because here we see, say, Bitcoin hash rate, right? The value going up the entire time while its price is falling precipitously. And at some point you start to question your own beliefs. Like, what's going on here? When is this thing going to stop? It. So it felt good to see that materialize, that rebound materialize as we thought it should.
Right. And where do you think we are now? Is this a genuine rebound, or was this just a tease? Where do you think we're at in terms of price?
Using our very limited sample size of a decade and about 4 of these cycles, the bull market began in late April 2019, and that's when the 50-day crossed over the 200-day moving average. And so for context, the last time that happened was July 15. We saw Bitcoin bottom around 200. After that 50 broke the 200, it broke up to $600, so it tripled in price pretty rapidly. Mm-hmm. It then corrected down 50% to 300, and I believe that was in August of 15. And from there, it went on this 27-month bull run to 20,000. So from July 15 to December 17, you go from $200 to 20,000. That's a 100x in 29 months. That was the last cycle. This cycle, we bottomed at 3,200 in December of 18. It looks like the bull market started in earnest in April of 19. And we had this run. We had this run up to 13,000, right? So from 3,200 to 13, which is even a larger magnitude than the last run. Instead of tripling it, it's almost a little more than quadrupled, actually. And now we've had this correction back down to roughly 50%. It's hit in the mid-sevens. So if we're using last cycle as our proxy, I think we're right there. We're in August 15. We're sitting, at the time when it was sitting at 300, today it's, say, 8,000. And given all of the macroeconomic conditions, QE infinity, this race to the bottom in currencies worldwide, this the Lindy effect, people seeing Bitcoin, that learning more about it all the time, the knowledge is becoming more and more diffused into society. And then you have these the institutional architecture between the crypto asset world and traditional finance, where you're going to have much larger capital pools coming into the space. I think we're set up for a really big bull run. People throw price targets out all the time and say it's not financial advice, and I guess I will do the same. But we have an internal target of 120,000 in the next 36 months. I'm not certain that we're right, but that would be very conservative in context of history.
Right. And do you think the next bull run will be, if we say 2017 was retail led, do you think the next one will be institutional? Or a bit of both?
Certainly going to be a bit of both, but I think there is an inflection point for the institutions, and it's going to be driven by price. Say it's 50,000. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin breaks 50,000, and you have this, perfectly inelastic supply curve that's not giving any ground. The more demand there is for Bitcoin, it's only being expressed in its price, right? That's one of the beautiful things about it. that exacerbates the FOMO big time. Because
Yeah.
as people are piling in, the price is all demand increases are being fully expressed in price, and people start to chase this thing. So I think that psychological paradigm holds at the institutional level. At it, say it's 50,000 Bitcoin, and then you see large capital pools start to take 25 basis points, 50 basis points, 1% exposure to Bitcoin, and that's when things get truly bonkers because that is the majority of the capital in the world
Yeah.
uh, sitting inside these vehicles. So, yeah, again, that architecture being there, the channels between traditional financial world and Bitcoin is a very powerful enabler of this bull run.
And it's still, I mean, if you've been in here for a while, I mean, it's amazing how big it's gotten. But as we all know, I mean, $200 billion in the context of, global money and investments and investment products is like literally nothing.
Literally nothing. I think the Fed has been injecting 75 to 100 billion a day into the repo markets the past few weeks. I mean, 200 billion is nothing. Um,
What do you make of the current situation? Because, in 2006, 7, I was like, this is all fucked, this is going down, gold and silver, because obviously Bitcoin wasn't around then. And here we are 10 years later, 12 years later, and it's been able to be propped up. And I know you said right off the bat that timing is the hardest thing to predict. But what do you make of just the current situation of the amount of negative rates and, how much money is being pumped into the system? What's your opinion on all that?
I, a macro level, believe we are in the death throes of this monetary policy experiment. Um, Again, zooming all the way out, we've had money more or less in society for 5,000 years. Only the past 100 have we had this true experiment called fiat, which really didn't begin until 1971. We went on to a true fiat basis, where we had completely and entirely severed money's anchor to time, and that has just led to these runaway market distortions. It's increasingly volatile and violent boom and bust business cycle, of which the Great Recession of 2008 was the latest expression. And here we are again. We're at historically overpriced markets in basically every dimension, right? PE, EBITDA to enterprise value, anything you can think of. We're also historically indebted. We're also printing money at a historic pace. The thing is coming unraveled before our eyes. There's a great account on Twitter, Paranoid Bull. I think he's been beating this drum for years. And again, it's impossible to say when, like what sparks the implosion, but
It seems like it's a powder keg.
it is. I don't see how you reverse it. It's so far gone at this
Is
point.
is Bitcoin even ready to, to play the role it needs to play?
No, I don't. I mean, it can be yes. Your fees and the blockchain are going to go through the roof, and it's going to be a crazy stampede and confusing and all of these things. The consumer tech just isn't there. The consumer-facing tech, it's still very complicated to use, and the analogy is mid-'90s internet, right? Dial-up, whatever. It's just hard to use, frankly. So, in one sense, yeah, the technology, the backbone is there. It can support final settlement across the network of all central banks in the world today. However, actually creating that transition, transitions are inherently bloody and complicated. So yes, the backbone can, but I don't think the interface is there for most people to be comfortable with it.
Do you give any time to thinking how this transition might occur? You just mentioned the changes and transitions are usually kind of bloody and uncomfortable. I know it's not a fun thing to think about, but do you give any thought to that?
I do think about it. I would just recommend a book. and I think a lot of Bitcoiners have read it. But if you haven't, you should go pick up a copy of The Sovereign Individual. It was written 20, 25 years ago, and it predicted that microprocessing and the digital age would subvert the nation state over time. And a lot of the perspectives through which they look at this change in the world are sort of coming to pass. Again, it's written 25 years ago. They had a prediction for an anonymous digital cash. So just to give you an idea of their prescience. Just go read that. It's hard to say how it's going to unfold, but take a real deep, close look at history, and that's the best way you're going to get an idea of what could happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's when such momentous change is on the horizon. It's, as you said, we have a hard time kind of conceptualizing exponential change, but when it's on the horizon, it seems, even though objectively you might think all signs point to that, but to actually convince yourself and believe that it's going to transpire that way, and then the accompanying lifestyle or behavior changes or preparations that you need to make. I mean, there just seems to always be a gulf there. It's like the status quo is so comforting that no matter what we see objectively, we won't make the changes until we're forced to, and then obviously Bitcoiners are ahead of the curve in that respect, but probably not on all dimensions, but most people are possibly on none.
I agree completely. And there's a quote by Machiavelli. I'm going to paraphrase, so I don't know the actual quote, but he says essentially that one of the greatest failings of man is to not prepare for the tempest when things are calm.
Right.
Right. When peacetime pervades and things are good and you've got freedom and money and everyone's flowing nicely in society, you should be preparing for the worst. And I think that is just some timeless wisdom that, again, people should heed.
Are there any, particular ways that you prepare for the worst or have prepared for the worst?
Yes, not something I'd like to go into great detail on, but again, read that book. I think it'll help everyone.
Yeah. Two more things before we break into some of the rapid fires. But I keep coming back to this issue, and I think it's just because my tune has changed on it so dramatically since earlier in my life. But the gun debate is a very emotionally charged and seemingly important debate, especially in America these days. I mean, which is almost concerning in itself, because it's not even a debate in most other parts of the world. It's a given that people basically shouldn't have guns or shouldn't have a certain type or a certain number. And I've been giving it a lot more consideration lately, because I was always on the other side. I was like, well, why do people need guns? But I think as you start to game out how a transition might occur from one type of government and system and monetary standard to another, you begin to realize that just like the way you protect your digital sovereignty, you've got to have things in place to protect your physical sovereignty. And that makes the debate a lot more meaningful. And at the end of the day, I guess it comes down to, do you want only one group of people to have the means to exercise force? I mean, that's pretty simple, right? Do you think only one group of people in society should have the means of force, or do you think everybody should have it? And what can you reasonably expect and predict to happen if there's an imbalance of power of that kind? I mean, we've got lots of examples throughout history. It's amazing that they go unnoticed in these or unarticulated in these debates. But what happens when there's an imbalance of power? Well, the people with power generally exercise it over the people that don't.
Right. That is certainly a very contentious topic. Having grown up in Tennessee, been shooting guns my entire life. Um, I I guess I stop short when we're talking about regulating firearms. Is it just, I guess in general, this movement is we're moving away from the importance of political consensus. Frankly, even if you want to regulate and ban guns, well, we 3D print guns now.
Right.
So it becomes more of a question of, do you want to be exposed to an asymmetry and a power dynamic, right? Do you want to be caught without protection, or do you want to be protected in case some shit happens? And I know it's a very sensitive subject in this country, in this world, but I think a lot of the gun violence is an expression of that asymmetry often.
Yeah.
So I, you know, it's just important that everyone sort of keeps their own best interest in mind and not relying on the government or whoever to protect you or come and save you. Like, you need to take charge of your own sovereignty, your own life, and deal with your own shit, frankly.
Yeah.
And that's just how I approach life.
And, we've got to make decisions that are not founded in emotional responses. As rational as those emotional responses may be, making decisions predicated on that is not going to result in a scenario and situation that benefits us. As a result of this debate and wanting to be more informed, I looked into it a bit, and I came across a term that I'd never come across before, and it's called democide. And I don't know if you're familiar with the term. I can't remember the author who popularized it and did this statistical work and analysis. But it's basically democide is like, deaths as a result of state force, non-conflict, so non-war related state force. Just basically the state killing its citizens.
It's brutality.
Yeah, and I think in the 20th century, I'm going to get the exact number wrong, but over 200 million, I think. Like maybe it was 170, 200 million. And so if we go back to that if we bring data to the argument, you say, and I don't have the figures, but just in terms of trying to bring some sense to this, it's like, well, let's look at how many, gun-related deaths occurred in the 20th century by, your general, citizen-on-citizen gun violence. And then let's look at the way in which the state has used force over that same period of time. And you say, which one inspires you more are you not kind of convinced that it's important to have a check and balance on state power when it's so apparent at the ways in which that power has been abused in the 20th century? Like, that was a big convoluted way of saying that, but you know what I'm saying? Like, people don't have an appreciation for how state power has kind of gone awry during that period of time.
Absolutely. I think it's Rothbard says, a government is the apparatus of violence and coercion, something to that effect.
Yeah.
It is a private enterprise. There may be some representations that it's serving the public good, but at the end of the day, it's whoever is holding the reins to power. They're operating in their own self-interest. And if they're exercising this monopoly on violence or monopoly on money to benefit themselves disproportionately at the expense of everyone else, that is a reality you should be mindful of. So, I think we're just very enfeebled, maybe a little bit, as a result of these big centralized states. I think a lot of people just assume that the services that have been provided will sort of continue to be provided, and the protections they've been afforded will always be there. And it's softening a bit to people. For sure. I would, encourage you not to become soft.
Yeah. I think that's well put, and I think people becoming soft is very clearly a result of of this nanny state mentality where you delegate so many responsibilities and other things to the state, of course you're going to get people that, well, as an abdication of that responsibility, don't take it upon themselves to make themselves more resilient, let's say, in whatever capacity it might be. All right, man, before we do the rapid fire, is there anything that, has been on your mind lately, you're spending a lot of mind juice on, that it's intriguing you, that we haven't touched on?
I'm working on a piece right now that's sort of meant to communicate the momentousness of Bitcoin to the macro hedge fund manager sphere. A few of the guys are really starting to get it, like Raoul Pal. He's been very outspoken about it. A few other guys, but I think that's the next big awakening too, or people at the heart of the traditional financial world seeing that this thing is to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking a lot about kind of how to speak their lingo and how to communicate it in that way. So
you were just on a Real Vision show, right? You were talking about gold versus Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I appeared. We did the filming late last month. I think it airs sometime middle of this month. And yeah, from what I'm told, he's putting together an expert panel of guys that are proponents of gold versus guys that are proponents of Bitcoin. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Cool. All right, man. So this part, I've got a series of questions. You can take as long as you want, or as short as you want to answer them. You can say pass if you want. So it's entirely up to you. I'll just hit them one by one.
Okay.
So what is money?
Money is a metaphor for time, or money is a technology for moving value across space-time.
If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother or 80-year-old, what would you say?
Digital money for the digital world, I guess.
What's the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
Separation of money and state.
What does the sovereign individual mean to you, the quote-unquote sovereign individual?
The sovereign individual is a reversion to the natural state of man.
Nice. How long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more about it and purchase it, if you're comfortable saying?
I heard about it in 14 and purchased some, but didn't fall down the rabbit hole until late 16.
What was the impetus for falling down the rabbit hole?
It's funny, I've told the story before, but I was actually studying Ethereum when I came into the concept of smart contracts. I thought that was really interesting, thought it was going to be a big deal. Started investing, where my money went, my mind followed, and then over time, like most of us, became a Bitcoin maximalist or rationalist.
I'm always interested in when people kind of caught the virus. Some people, as soon as they heard about it, they read the white paper and it just totally clicked. For me, I saw the value in it, thought it was interesting, but I didn't, become obsessed until a number of years later.
Yeah.
Most effective way about educating people about Bitcoin, so in conversation or more formally?
I think conversation is clearly most important. I mean, word of mouth is the best form of marketing in the world. But there's an art to that game, and that's part of what I'm trying to do with my work, is convert these complexities into simplicity.
What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin, in your opinion?
I will actually name my favorite movie, which is Gangs of New York.
Nice.
Which taught me that all these groups that we call business or corporations or governments, we're all just gangs. We're all just groups of people. People should just look at the world like that. There's no nanny out there that's going to take care of you.
Favorite movie, clip, or rant of all time?
That's tough. I'll have to pass.
Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
Biggest vulnerability is all the nations in the world acting in concert to go back to the gold standard immediately, and they might have a chance. That's it, I think.
What was your most recent aha or level up in your understanding of Bitcoin?
Actually, right before this show, so back to the definition of money, I said it's a technology for moving value across time as a store of value, right? It holds value across time. It's also a technology for moving value across space as a medium of exchange, so we can share it with one another. And then my aha moment was it's also a technology for moving value across consciousness as a unit of account, right? Once it becomes sufficiently distributed and used enough, it actually changes our mental machinery. If you think about how many times a day you think in dollars or whatever your local currency is, it installs itself almost as software in our consciousness. So that was it. Technology for moving value across time, space, and consciousness.
You're going to have to put a Medium article down for that one. What do you think will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on society?
Decentralization of state power.
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to its reserves, and will they exist in 20 years?
I think Venezuela may be walking that path today. So I would say within a couple of years, if they haven't already, in secret. Will the central bank exist in 20 years? Not in the form we know it today.
What is the biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
I would say active trading on Bitcoin is extremely difficult.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous, and the coins that he likely controls?
An interesting mystery.
What have you learned about yourself, or how have you changed, if at all, as a result of learning about and interacting with Bitcoin?
I have across the board lowered my time preference. I think I'm just healthier. I read more. I'm just thinking longer term in general.
Yeah, that's one of the super interesting elements of this whole thing, is that it's literally changing who people are, like it's upgrading people just by being involved in it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Have you ever purchased other coins? If so, are you likely to do so again in the future?
I do hold some alternative positions, yes.
What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion? If none on Bitcoin, any subject is okay.
I think things seem really bad in the world, but I like to believe that it's darkest before the dawn. And I think we're on the cusp of an awakening on multiple levels.
Ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
We'll go with our target, 120,000.
Right. And I got to go back to that last question for a sec. Awakening in multiple dimensions. Can you articulate some of those dimensions?
Yeah, back to the opening question of the show. People are rediscovering spirituality is a big one. Through the practice of yoga or meditation or mindfulness or healthy diet or Eckhart Tolle or all these number of channels.
Psychedelics.
Psychedelics, absolutely. Ayahuasca seems to be very popular these days. Even cannabis, I guess, to some extent, sort of helps people get a little more woke sometimes. So that's all. It just seems, and this is way outside of Bitcoin. Across the board, there's people that don't know shit about Bitcoin, but they're working on themselves and their wokeness, if you will.
And they seem primed to maybe get some Bitcoin in their lives.
Yeah, once they get it, they will.
Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
I do. So typical morning is I write in my gratitude journal. I read a little bit of Krishnamurti, who's an Eastern philosopher. Really good stuff. I read some Bible verse. I usually try to do a meditation, do a 30-minute read, 30 minutes to an hour if I have time. Have my coffee, and that's it. Start the day.
That sounds dope, man. What do you like in particular?
Make my bed. That was the other one.
What's that? Make your bed.
I make my bed, yeah.
What's your what do you like about Krishnamurti? Why him specifically?
Uh, Helping me, well, anyone realize the limitations of knowledge. You know, we're looking at the universe through a keyhole, all of us. We think that everything can be defined by symbol or word or code or language or knowledge. It's just not the case. You know, there's so much more truth, timeless truth, deep within us all.
Yeah.
And there's some fundamental connection there between ourselves and nature. You know, we are nature, we're of nature, and we can access this dimension that is something else, to say the least. And his writing is just beautiful for helping me get there.
Yeah, I was drawn to him in my early 20s, and one of the things I liked, I've always consumed a lot of philosophy and, of all kinds. But I liked his approach because I saw it as rather than, dictating, rather than saying how things are, what his philosophy is. I liked how he'd often just say, someone would ask him a question, and a lot of his books are in this format, and he would just say, I don't know, let's talk about it. And then the conversation would unfold, and he'd obviously inject his wisdom and insight into it. But I just really appreciated the kind of non-authority style in which he did stuff. He was like, "That's a great question. Let's talk about it and see where we can get."
That's so true. In a lot of his writings, he interrupts himself, like, such and such, is it not? He's always inviting people to question it for themselves. He's a great writer.
Yeah. How do you define success?
Freedom.
Most impactful book you've ever read?
Whew. One that had a big impact on me early on was The Tao of Physics, which just awakened me to the parallels between modern science and ancient Eastern mysticism. It's just incredible how much wisdom the ancients have that we may take for granted or disregard today. And then one more recently, I've actually read it twice, and he is my favorite author, is Nassim Taleb's Anti-Fragile. I've read the whole series, but Anti-Fragile, I think, is my favorite of the 5, and it's an incredible book.
Who's the author of The Tao of Physics?
It is Frijot Capra, I believe. I'm not sure if I'm saying the first name right, but Fritoj or Jot. Capra.
I'll have to check that one out. Where or who is your go-to place to learn more about Bitcoin?
Twitter is an unbelievable resource. If you follow the right people and you go down the right rabbit holes. I would also add in, I think, and a lot of people agree to this, the Nakamoto Institute has a lot of great intro resources for Bitcoiners. And then if you want to go into Austrian economics, more Mises.org, you can't even get through. They have everything. Whole books on there in PDF, done very nicely. There's more to read there than you can get through probably in a lifetime. And if you haven't read some of these amazing Austrian authors like Rothbard, Mises, Hayek, these guys are something else, and they'll change you just by reading their books.
Yeah. What is the one most important action that myself or anyone listening can take today to up our game in an area that's important to you or an area of your expertise? So if someone wants to improve, what's a way that you think people can try to do so today? Very general, I know, but whatever comes to your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think morning routine is good, just to have some structure in your life. Exercise every day, that's just changes the game across the board. Happier, healthier, all the things, sleeping better. And then for me, I guess I would just say figure out your diet. I don't think everyone's dietary needs are the same, but for me, like a ketogenic, paleo-ish diet works really well. So.
Yeah, and shameless plug for me, the last podcast I published was with Sean Baker, the popularizer of the carnivore diet.
Yeah, I've been doing the carnivore for the past few months on and off, and it's been great.
Yeah. What is one question you'd like to see added to this list?
What is the meaning of life?
Damn. Heavy. That's going to be it. Yeah. Just one final one to ask you. What is the meaning of life? All right, last bit, word association. So I'll throw out a word. You just tell me the first thing that pops into your head.
Oh, okay.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Bitcoin.
Government.
The state.
Hash rate.
Skin in the game.
The individual.
Sovereignty.
Security.
Security. Opposite of freedom.
Ego.
Opposite of spirit.
Greed.
Sin.
What'd you say? Zen?
Sin. Sorry.
What do you say?
Sin.
Oh, sin. Okay. Sorry.
Sin.
Stack,
Sin.
stacking sats.
Money.
Fiat currency.
Garbage.
Guns.
Tools.
Altcoins.
Shit coins.
Pizza.
Delicious.
Socialism.
Failure.
Family.
Everything.
Trump.
Failure.
Future.
Bright.
Libra.
Aquarius.
Gold.
Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin.
Freedom.
Done, man. That's it.
Awesome.
Do you have any closing thoughts, closing words, anything you want to get out there?
No, man, this was awesome. Thank you for the wide-ranging discussion. I really didn't know what to expect, but I had a great time.
Well, I did as well too, man. I appreciate you giving me the time. Love your writing. I hope you keep doing that. And like I said, that little bit that you just broke into there at the end of the rapid fire, I'd like to see a Medium article on that soon, because this space is infinitely interesting to many of us, I know. And anytime you can have someone kind of put a different perspective and spin on things and just expand your understanding of what this might represent, I think there's a lot of demand for that. So we'll be anxiously looking forward to the next piece that comes out. And hopefully, 6-12 months in the future, we can do this again and see where we're at and how things have changed.
Perfect. Sounds fun.
All right, brother. Will you take care of yourself?
All right, man. You too. Thank
Later.
you.